The world of Little Nightmares is a frightening place. It's a setting that is equally intriguing but also dangerous, filled with discarded homes and crooked monsters that personify arguably the most grimmest form imaginable, which is our own human bodies. Described by the team of Tarsier Studios as a collective work of horror, the influence and reverence for the genre is apparent throughout both games, pulling from various forms of visual media from the iconic to the obscure that all feed together for a loving homage that is felt on both a surface and narrative level. For something this coded in reference, it has me wondering how these games have been able to forge their own identity and find its own spot in the pantheon of other survival horror juggernauts. When many of its contemporaries aim to go big or go home chasing trends, the journey of Six and Mono are differentiated by one simple thing: perspective. Everything is seen from the viewpoint of these small children inhabiting this twisted landscape, and because of this, every threat is given a greater sense of dread, because of how our weakness makes that sense of mortal danger more apparent. My plan here is not to expose the mysteries of these games or how it all ties together, but instead why you should care, how the beauty of this world crawls under your skin, the group of artists that made this world come to life, as well as crafting an experience that will stay with you long after the journey is over. Now, without further ado, let us dive in. Part 1. Small Beginnings. The best place to start is the beginning. Well, okay, more specifically, we're talking about Tarsier Studios. To fully appreciate Little Nightmares, it's important to understand the group of people that brought it to life in the first place. Based in the Swedish city of Malmö, the company was founded in 2004 under the direction of CEO Andreas Jonsson, with the indie developer spending much of its early life in collaboration with Sony, developing additional content for the likes of Little Big Planet, as well as the 2015 Vita exclusive Tearaway. What gave the studio its start was their entry into a game concept competition, which gave the small group access to a wider variety of software, facilities, and resources to make their work more manageable. After going through enough interviews, one thing that stood out is the relatively small size of the studio, with roughly 70 employees across multiple different departments. Now, to bring this into perspective, the manpower to make any game will vary drastically, and I am not the person to ask about the specifics on each department or salaries, but to give some context, BioWare employed 800 people while working on the Mass Effect trilogy, and even with that number, couldn't save Anthem. Because when the capitalist E asked B to make A, didn't really work out. The company's EA, that's the joke. I think this is what gives Tarsier's games their charm. When so many other major publishers lay on hundreds of workers on AAA releases that often feel factory produced, it's nice to see a smaller vision and individual ideas more present. The other thing you've probably noticed looking at the footage on screen is how their early work has this cutesy, handmade quality to it. Their characters have this bubbly charm to them, like they were built from a child's wild imagination, with big eyes and disproportionate bodies trying to navigate through an arts and crafts world that feels ever-changing. Not in a scary way, but exciting, as if we're filling in the details as we go along. Little Big Planet specifically captures a real sense of carefree enthusiasm that's quite endearing. Which begs the question, how do we go from Sackboy to long, lanky boy? This is the worst joke I've ever made, I swear. The year is 2015. An enigmatic teaser dropped for a side-scroller called Hunger. Not to be confused with the Steve McQueen Hunger Strike drama of the same name, Hunger followed a small, rain-coated child navigating through large, damp rooms filled with grotesque chefs and one very long-armed janitor. It felt like the love child of a Henry Selick stop-motion feature and Playdead's Limbo. It was vague, but also intriguing. Nothing like this had come out from the studio before. It wasn't another brand extension, but instead a new IP. And after being secured by Namco Bandai, along with a slight name change, probably to not get in the way of McQueen, Little Nightmares was born. Despite these last-minute changes, this was still very much their baby. With the restrictions off, they were going to mold this story of stalking eyes and twisted monsters into a personal breed of horror that also pays tribute to its various influences. Seeing the slow evolution from cutesy to grotesque, it's clear to see how Tarsier took what they learned in order to build their own works, and that is all on display in the opening moments. Speaking of which... Part 2. Mysterious, yet effective world building. Each game begins nearly identically. With the same cold open, we're dropped into a black void with little context or logic as to what is happening. Despite these unusual circumstances, these cold enclosed spaces have this bizarre pull to them. Quite literally, as the first shot is a forward dolly that pushes through the darkness, and as it goes deeper, something comes into focus, whether it's the silhouette of an ominous woman dressed in a kimono or a blue light at the end of a tunnel. The gliding, smooth camera work coupled with the pull focus give this supernatural quality to the player's point of view. The first impression is everything, from the deliberate movements that feel akin to the Steadicam work of Kubrick's The Shining, to the use of depth and colour. It gives us a hint of what is to come, but like all dreams, it feels hazy and mysterious. And just as we're getting drawn in, we wake up in the shoes of a small child, one in a suitcase surrounded by steel walls, the other in a forest, and it's abundantly clear they don't belong here. With no cue, the only option is to venture further into this strange land in some hope of safety. In many ways, you can tell the quality of a story by how much or how little it tells you. From its visual design, both the Maw and Pale City are these surreal, towering structures placed at obtuse angles, like at any moment they could buckle and crush all those below. The interiors feel even more derelict, filled with trash and some seriously misshapen public servants. But what's important is how each interior visually tells us a story. For the entirety of both games, there isn't a single spoken word of dialogue, outside some brief calls from our main characters and growls from the other inhabitants. Ugh, I don't even want to know what that means. So, why was this limitation employed? If we can't get into our character's headspace, how can we understand their feelings? Outside of death and the pause screens, the gameplay is never interrupted with a fancy CG cutscene, but instead done through the in-game engine, meaning the flow is never broken, as well as the bird's eye perspective keeping Mono and Six feeling tiny in this world of giants, never letting us forget that we are at the bottom of the food chain. Speaking with narrative director Dave Mervick, actually felt this had a positive effect on the team having to get more creative for communicating the story.
Yeah, there's no dialogue in the game. That's also part of the interpretive approach to the storytelling. Dialogue can hide a multitude of sins, and we want to ensure that the story of Little Nightmares exists in the world and not just a few expository cutscenes.
While I do love me some old-fashioned schlocky dialogue, early Resident Evil was the master of camp in this regard. The conscious decision to exclude probably the most versatile communication tool there is, it allows us to take in the other elements on display. Take for instance the school level from Little Nightmares 2. After passing through the fence, the first shot we see of it is a run-down but threatening structure looming over our main duo, dwarfing them in size. It feels intimidating yet also a bit unknowable. The key word that links the visual design together, from the monsters to the buildings, is surreal. But what does that actually mean? No, like seriously, what does it mean? I'm a film student, not an art student. I mean, they're completely different things. Originating from the early 20th century, the movement was born out of an aggressive rejection of conventional artistic and moral values. Like the name suggests, it's difficult to really pin down characteristics as many pieces are built from the unconscious mind, depicting abstract objects as well as twisting daily ones into bizarre shapes. This feeling doesn't necessarily have to be interpreted as horror, but the cryptic nature often means there's something upsetting trying to identify what parts of our own body and world we see in these paintings. Basically, if art was like Lego, the normal kids would play with the expensive Millennium Falcon set that goes up in value every month, while the weirdo plays with the bucket of random pieces. Heh, I waste so much money. This is just one of the various characteristics that's encoded into the world of Little Nightmares, not the Legos. A lot of the visual direction feels like this smorgasbord of horror iconography stacked together. The influence of authors like Stephen King with the focus on childhood struggles crossed with the fantastical danger of Del Toro. It all feels like one giant celebration of the genre, but most importantly, it doesn't feel like a shameless borrowing of ideas or a wink to the audience. These influences all built a clear visual language of homage to poke at our sense of nostalgia for older media that all scared us as kids. Because as weird as it sounds, horror can be really cathartic, helping us confront these long-held fears that have spent an elongated time in our heads, which can let us evolve and deal with these anxieties more directly. Speaking of elongated, let's talk about that public servant.
Hell no.
Oh no! You see this? You see this ruler-slapping pianist who's actually really talented at etiquette for D minor? This is the boss for the school section, and it serves as a great example of how much Little Nightmares digs into our collective childhood fears, as it takes this archetypical figure in a traditional setting to a ludicrous extreme. The massive head that feels too heavy on that skinny, sharp body, that long smile which seems ever present, and of course that very long, ever-expanding neck. These extended ligaments seem to be shared across many of the different creatures, like the noodle-armed janitor, who apparently is referred to as Roger by the character designers. There's a lot of these connected characteristics that all serve in making them feel all part of the same collective evil force, which according to Mervick,
the exaggerated way that kids see the world, like these terrifying authority figures or people who seem larger than life in their nightmares, who just have total control over their destiny.
there are mysteries upon mysteries, some of which aren't even fully stated, but all pull together to give this sense that this world is out to get you. There's no ability to fight back, all you can do is run. There's no experience points, there's no RPG skill tree to improve your skills in. Even in Little Nightmares 2, when you're given a weapon, it's merely to get through some messed up school children. All you got is your wits and your ability to run, and these chases make up some of the most exciting and tense moments, escaping from death by mere inches and often leading to a pretty bloody crescendo. It should be noted that the depth perception could be seen as a hindrance, as judging the character's positioning and failing a jump can kill the momentum. Like, no joke, I got stuck at this mannequin section for ages, like it took me so many goes. And, you know, that might be due to the fact I just suck at video games, and I just need to get good. Also, that's no offense if you play games on easy mode, that is totally fine. You should not feel invalidated because it's too difficult for you. It can be frustrating, but when it all comes together, when it all clicks and the pacing is just right and the jump is at the right moment and you turn the tables on your unsuspecting foe, it is so good. All of this is enhanced by some terrific music by Tobias Lilia. The score rises and falls with the action beats. Each monster has its own appropriate theme related to the setting, and it all comes together to create something that is childlike, catchy, but also intimidating. Given everything I've said so far about how grotesque everything is, from the monsters to the world itself, after playing long enough, there's also something weirdly beautiful about the empty world. At multiple moments, when the camera pulls back and the sound design captures all the ambience, it's like the game is letting us take in the first breath of fresh air that we've had in so long. From the rain-soaked streets to the sunshine of a new morning, it is criminal there isn't a dedicated photo mode. There are so many awe-inspiring vistas that give this lonely journey into hell a sense of scale, throughout so much of which it's easy to feel alone. But that's not entirely true. Part 3. Connections and Relationships. Back in February of this year for my birthday, I treated myself to the collector's edition of Little Nightmares 2, because once again I have an uncontrollable spending habit and the student loan will never catch me. With that out of the way, it came with a lot of the expected goodies, such as a steelbook, an art book, a sticker sheet, because why the hell not? But the highlight was this figurine model of Six in mono. Across all the marketing for Little Nightmares 2, there was an emphasis on showing that your journey was now going to be a shared one with a familiar face, which seems like the next logical step for a bigger sequel, to have Six become a second playable character. But instead of going with this common logic, Six is instead made into an independent NPC, a non-player character. Removing that control we previously had turns Six into her own thinking person. But at the same time, we've been in Six's shoes, and seeing a familiar face in some way gives us a sense of comfort. So when we enter the hunter's basement and hear a familiar tune playing, we feel this urge to help, and after a brief misunderstanding, Mono and Six work together to escape and give their pursuer a taste of his own medicine. The two children with some latent supernatural abilities only have each other, and in a place as messed up as the Pale City, that teamwork is the only thing that can get these two towards the end goal of the Signal Tower, the hive mind which governs this broken land. As a simple point A to B story, it already has a solid setup, but it's that connection which me, and to a broader extent the fanbase have latched so heavily onto, is that of their relationship. Part 3.5. Shipping. If you Google Little Nightmares 2, chances are you've probably seen a lot of fan content that's emerged since the game's release, ranging from animatic music videos recontextualizing the story to be happier, to a host of cute art showing Six and Mono helping each other out, or just enjoying each other's company. This isn't anything new in fan culture. A big part of fandom comes from reimagining established characters in new styles. Whether in the form of fanfiction, cosplay, or even original music, it provides a creative outlet for people to express themselves and their love for a fictional property. And arguably the most popular of this content is shipping. Originating from the science fiction drama The X-Files, the concept was coined to describe fans' reactions to the underlying sexual tension between Mulder and Scully. Basically, they were the OTPs of the late 90s before Ross and Rachel. A lot of the times in media, coding is used to give the suggestion of a character's relationship or actions without explicitly saying it within the text, often leaving a dynamic to be more malleable, leading to many viewers wanting to form their own headcanon or interpretations when they see their favorite fictional characters interact. It really doesn't take much to have characters linked together. It can vary from physical differences to beliefs to just general aesthetic differences, which can link them together.
Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
It's no surprise that a vast majority of popular ships tend to be queer-based, as having a potential voice to represent you can provide a sense of comfort which may be lacking from one's real life. It serves as another form of escapism that many are able to take the pieces laid out by creators, whether intentionally or not, and create their own stories. This doesn't necessarily have to apply to all relationships. I mean, speaking personally, I really feel there's a lack of platonic male-female relationships in media, which is often really frustrating because it creates this illusion that every time there must be a romance, when arguably it's just as important to show two people just getting along. Bringing this back to Little Nightmares 2, while I personally don't see Six and Mono's relationship as romantic, I mean, they are kids after all, there is this sense of warmth you get from seeing the two work together. All of this is felt in the gameplay, as your designated grab button, which you use for moving objects, is also your option for holding her hand, not just in puzzles, but just moving around the environment. You're not punished for ignoring this mechanic outside some harder boss encounters and loss of a potential achievement, But in these massive spaces, you feel weirdly naked without that companion beside you. At every opportunity, I found myself going back to hold Six's hand to ensure that she and Mono felt safe. This feeling was never present in the original, as it was primarily just focused on Six surviving by herself. And we know this girl, we've been in her shoes, so just like Mono, we'd feel a need to protect this person we're familiar with. And this is when the game starts to play around with your trust. Because we believe Six wouldn't hurt us, but there's always this sense that there's something really not okay with her. Like how she dispatches one of the porcelain children, or just leaving the doctor to burn alive and just sits there to enjoy the flame. It feels like there is a more sinister presence hiding underneath that yellow raincoat, which gives us the last piece of connected tissue between Six and Mono. Both are connected to an ominous figure that has been stalking them since the very first step of their journey. Every enemy we've seen up until this point have all been isolated encounters, locked to their respective buildings. Once you've crossed the gap and made your escape, they can't hurt you anymore. And then these ones show up. All the other enemies up to this point have been exaggerated portraits of the human body, but the lady and the Fin Man are the only ones that don't resemble these other creatures. From a distance they almost look normal, at least by the standards of this world. They both have this greater presence to their actions, like they step into frame and they command the room. But most importantly, they are the grown-up versions of both children, the dark reflections of who these characters turn into. And this is immediately felt in how they take away any sense of control we might have. The lady turns children into her servants, the gnomes are helpless and can't even fend for themselves, while the Thin Man warps the world around Mono in a way he simply can't. This fear of the adult authority figure comes full circle in the climax of Little Nightmares 2. After escaping the hallway prison, Thin Man snatches Six, and after a grueling chase, Mono is left completely alone. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. The world, the monsters, the inability to stand up, to fight back. It just breaks him. All of this finally culminates in him taking off his mask, ready to accept his fate. And then, the game finally lets us push back. There's this invisible guiding line to progression in video games. Traditionally, it's expected that the more we play, the better we get. This usually shows itself in the form of XP or new items. Like, there's a reason why The Last of Us 1 and 2 only give you an automatic weapon in the final section as a tool, because after suffering so much, it lets us have one last cathartic push forward. This bleeds into the end of Little Nightmares 2 as Mono finally uses his connection to the signal tower and stands up to Fin Man. And using this power, which has been slowly building throughout, lets him tear the world open, finally break through that invisible door that's been holding him back, and pushes on to save Six. It gives us this hope that this one grasp of power might just be enough to get through, that we could save her, save us, and get out. And with that, we go into the heart of darkness itself to find our friend. It's frightening, to say the least. Every room is bathed in shades of purple. The puzzles are harder to read, difficult to solve, at times not making logical sense. But we keep moving forward until we eventually find her. Six has been transformed, influenced by the signal tower, and after destroying the music box that tied her to the influence, the inner workings finally are revealed. It expands and morphs into unholy shapes. As the two children make one last dash to the exit, the one final thing the game asks you to do is jump. It is impossible to progress through many of the puzzles, the chases, and traversal without your partner. After going through hell and back, the developers are asking you one more time to trust in your companion, to trust in them. You've done this so many times, it's ingrained into your subconscious that you can make that jump. You must make that jump. And you do make the jump. Six looks deep into Mono's eyes, hanging over the abyss. In that moment, no matter how cruel and how messed up the world is, as long as we have each other, we can survive anything, that there will always be a light at the end of the tunnel. Treasure and Six break your trust after all the pain and suffering you went through, all that effort, even when there were signs when we held on to the belief that there would be hope at the end of this road, is gone. Instead, Six, or whatever is left of that little girl, walks out of the portal and Mono is once again left alone. Time passes as the boy grows up. He becomes a familiar, frightening figure. As the camera dollies out of the closing door back into the hallway we started, the game fades to black for the last time. A fitting send-off to the duology of unique puzzle platformers, as well as Tarsier saying goodbye to their series. So what do I mean by that? Earlier this year, the developer announced that they would no longer be working on any future Little Nightmares titles, as the company is wanting to move on to new opportunities, with the rights currently being held by Namco Bandai. This leaves us at a weird crossroad. Given the success of both games, it makes sense that the brand is going to continue, more than likely have new teams come over, a la the Coalition coming in to make more Gears of War games. The truth is, I don't think there should be any more Little Nightmares games. I think they said what they wanted to do with this story, and really, if there is any other avenue to go down, I don't believe I could see anyone else tackle this vision or this story ever again. So much of what makes these games special is tied to this team. If you've taken anything away from this video, it should be what this group of talented developers made was something special. A diamond in a sea of rocks, a vision that felt like the work of artists, not a company, and in an ever-monopolized games industry that approves of crunch and routine disappointment, my interest in games is less focused on the next AAA release, but instead the works of smaller teams, the smaller talents, the supergiants, Dreamfell and now Tarsier, for crafting a fitting love letter to an often ridiculed genre, and doing it in a way that only video games can, with the innovative use of perspective. This is one nightmare that I never plan to forget.